Can you tell me what earned Hitler the nickname the Carpet Muncher?
On some occasions, Hitler would get out of his chair, collapse on the ground, and start flailing his body like he was having a seizure facing down. And then he would take the corner of an area rug that was under the table and start chewing on it.
What?
And
the fuck?
Yeah, and that's the name that he was given. Like low-level Nazis would start calling him Teppichfresser because this was the carpet muncher.
History, I'd like to follow me down the rabbit hole. History, I'd like to, frankly, I want to know.
Hi, welcome to HILF. History I'd like to fuck with Dawn Brody. I'm Dawn Brody, and it's nice here in the den. That's the Deluxe Edition Network. To find your next favorite podcast in the den, click the link in our show notes or go to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. Now today, a page from the history of World War II, which, I mean, any way you slice it, it's a big time HILF. Like, war sucks, but it's got whatever weird shit you're into, right? Spy stuff, occult stuff, war machines, love stories, the best good guys, and like the worst bad guys committing the worst crime in human history. I mean, and I've covered some aspects of World War II before, like episode 39, the Nazi killers, about those Dutch resistance fighters who seduced and then executed Nazis in the woods around their town. Yes. And in introducing that story, I talked about how I like to look at World War II with a real variable lens. You know, pull back, see it globally, South Pacific, Asia, Europe, the whole deal, and then zoom way in and focus on real specific and knowable parts. Now, for this episode, I am stoked to be joined remotely, he's in New York, by historian Michael Trapani, who has spent years researching a very specific portion of World War II, how it started. And he's got a new audiobook out called How to Start a War. And guys, listen, you know, I read all the time. I got a book in my hand, a book in my ear all the time. And this one, it had me like, this is a true story. I had to leave a coffee shop because I could not contain myself. I was standing up, gasping and shit. It was unsightly. I know, right? Let's get started.
I do the same thing, by the way. When I'm listening to something or when I'm reading something, I do that thing where I have to like put it down and walk around the room and just like, you know, put your hand in your hands and stuff. That happened to me a bunch of times while going through this.
I mean, it's how can you help it, right? And I wonder, and I think a lot of people feel that way, right? Especially folks who are probably listening to us are like, oh yeah, girl, we love fucking history, surprise. But I wonder if it also has something to do with you and I have a shared background in theater, right? And performance. And it was sort of a revelation to me when I was a theater major in college and a history minor, right? That I would be on one side of the river learning about Hamlet, right? And then I'd cross the bridge to the other side of the river and I'd learn about Polish history and like why the fact that they were waiting for Fortinbras at the end of Hamlet is so fucking nuts, right? And I would go to my theater kids and be like, Fortinbras is a guy. And this is fucking nuts, right? And then I'd go to my history kids and be like, did you know Fortinbras is mentioned in Hamlet? And equally. And I think it's because both arenas are dealing with stories, right?
Drama. I mean, when you're thinking about the events that are important enough to make it into the history books, you're talking about the most consequential events of that time, and many more, of course, that don't make it into history books, but the ones that actually do are certainly widely understood to be super important. And when it actually happens, if you actually stop and I don't know, I'm gonna diss track historians for a second. I feel like historians, for the source material that they work with, they are the worst storytellers. I mean, if you pick up like a super dense history book, which some of them are like, you have to have a appetite for that kind of material. And I think the general public loses so much by not framing these incredible events into the way that most of us intake information better than anything else, which is stories. And that's what happens, right? So I'm totally with you. It's really something.
I agree. And I think that there's something that happens. I'm going to use my finger, like real historians, right? Your tenured, published in multiple prestigious, well-respected documents. I think that they are bound,
yes,
in large part by the myth that history is more like science.
Yes.
In the sense that there is a fact, there is a provable truth to which we can all eventually get and upon which we will all, with enough information, ultimately agree. And I think that this is where our colleagues find themselves trapped, and often by hopefully, good salaries, because they're saying and they're pretending, yes, this is the true history, this is the correct history, instead of allowing for the fact that it's like and this is one of the things I always feel like when you're looking at a personal history, I look at just myself as an unreliable source of my own history, man. I do not know how I could possibly pretend to tell you that I know any fucking thing about what I thought when I was in middle school, let alone what Cleopatra, whether she was really in love with Julius Caesar or not. Yeah. I don't fucking know.
Yeah. And that's the piece of it too. It is, and look, I'm kidding when I say, dissing historians, because without them we wouldn't have this incredible interest. But and I get the mission, which is, just the facts, ma'am, kind of situation. That there's value, there's extreme value to that. You need that. It's a requirement for what you're, establishing any kind of story. But we know that historians, even the most scientific approach to history, which as close as you can get to it, things, we learn new things all the time. Perspectives change contemporaneously that influence how we tell history. And so as valuable as it is to tell the facts and to share the raw materials of what we know about something, it's, I think, just as important, maybe, is what I'm trying to say, to incorporate those facts into a compelling story. And that will lead, I think, to what the historian is ultimately trying to do, which is sharing information, sharing perhaps the lessons that come from those events. And I think we'd all be better for it.
Totally. And also you are always observing a history from a certain time in history, right? So if I'm going to claim there is a crime that I believe a historian could commit, it would be the same thing a journalist or a lawyer would be doing, which is a deliberate displacement, an intentional skewing of facts that are known to be true because you have a goal of showing something different, right? So obviously, and like I said, those three professions, I think, do share something similar in that we are expected to be doing our best to tell the truth, knowing that this is a subjective thing. But I think where they fall flat is the opposite, is not talking about the titties because it's too scandalous. And you're like, if you do not tell these children about the titties in Pompeii, then what are we doing?
Who's going to read this book without the titties? I mean,
it's got to bring the titties. Come on. That's where we come in. You bring a soundtrack. I bring the titties. And I mentioned that you have a theater background, but you're like, you yourself have some HILFing because you are a historian and an author. This is why you are, what brings you to us, of course. You're also are a stage actor, a voice actor, a playwright. I feel like when you research enough history, you can't help but find drama. But then you also are something of a tech marketing guru working for the likes of Apple and IBM. You make marketing software. You're a dad. I mean, this is how I know you must love fucking history, because you do not apparently need anything to fill your time.
Yeah. Occasionally I get the question of like, oh, how do you do all that? It's like, just badly. like really badly.
I fuck everything up.
Yeah,
That's how I do it.
Yeah, it's impossible to do all those things. So like my writing history, contrary to what most people would believe, is not quite the bank, jackpot that you might think. But no, I mean, this is also my first work of history that's publishing, and I'm really excited about it. So maybe there's more in the future. But yeah, my day job, I work in technology, which I've also been also very interested in, and I think there's a lot of parallels. But my background has a ton of performing arts in there. And I think it led to the medium of the work, which I think is an interesting topic. At some point we can get into, but this idea of this concept of audio drama, which I think is
it's so good.
Yeah, it's sort of a lost art. The medium of sound is just fascinating. And when I was really little, more often than I was read, bedtime stories, my grandmother gave me audio cassettes of old-fashioned golden age radio dramas, and I would fall asleep listening to Sherlock Holmes and Suspense, which was a precursor to shows like The Twilight Zone, the westerns, the comedies, and you learn a lot about how to create drama through the medium of sound. And there's definitely an art to it that I wanted to explore. And it also felt really natural with this particular story because a lot of those radio dramas were performed and broadcast around the time the story takes place. So it felt natural. And then like as you get in deeper, I start to bring some of that actual broadcasting into the story. So you hear a lot of the original broadcasts as the tensions rise, as the story becomes more global, and you start to hear more reporting, journalists reporting on it over the radio, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is so compelling a listen to. It feels sort of like an audiobook, sort of like a radio program, sort of like an audio documentary. Because as Michael said, he is a great voice, and he is you have just the right amount of drama to not become sort of unreliable, right? You do voices, but you're not making us nuts with it, right? It's just like, I feel like it reaches this perfect level. And you have diegetic sound to kind of put you in the room and make the listener feel as if they're there. But then additionally, he includes actual radio broadcasts that discuss and really bring into the feeling of the present. People, be like, oh, the news just in, Hitler's a fucking liar. Oh my God, I didn't fucking know that, and you're listening to it like, Jesus, this really was a shock, and it's just so good. And you also have, as sort of the beating heart of this book, in addition to it being well-researched history that's delivered in a very, entertaining way, is you have a point, man, and you have a point that you state at the beginning that you repeat clearly and consistently throughout, which is you, the listener, have power. And you make a clear point that you are going to be focusing on these nasty-ass bastards who started this incredible crime, and that you are risking celebrating them. You know that it can be perceived when you spend this much time thinking about a bastard that you sort of think they're not a bastard, but that the purpose is to show you twofold. They are the same mortal skin sack you are. That these fucking guys were not gods. They were flawed. They almost failed a lot. And that there were other sloppy skin sack human beings around them that could have stopped them without much difficulty at so many points throughout this story. And you do it so well, Michael, that part of the reason why my ass was up in that coffee shop is because I started to hope. Which is wonderful. I'm listening to this story. I know, man. I probably know it slightly better than the average consumer, And also World War II is like Titanic. We don't not know what happens to that boat. But you I found myself looking in the eyes of these people you've introduced us to, the heroes and the villains, and just thinking to myself, come on, man, just put his face through the desk. You know, he's a squibby little nerd and you're more powerful than him. Why are you listening? You know, and it's just so much fun. And to that end, man, here's my plan for the fucking with you today, Michael. I have selected some of my favorite, most chest-pumping moments from the book, the ones that had me on my feet and excusing myself from polite society. And what I'd like to do is I'll sort of try to set those moments up so that our listeners can sufficiently be along with us. And then I'm gonna have you just blow our hair back with the big guns. And it's gonna be tough for me because my listeners should know better than anybody. I never shut the fuck up. In real life, when I am talking with human beings, I literally bite my tongue so that I don't interrupt them because I am terrible and it's a crime of mine. So forgive me in the beginning if I'm a cunt. It's an error of enthusiasm.
Dawn, it's why they listen, because they love you. So bring it on. Let's make this happen.
All right, let's hop in bed and fucking start a war, Michael. The first story is logically, it's one of the first stories in your book. And it is the story of the Beer Hall Putsch, which I call AKA Hitler Putsch out. I'm very proud of myself.
Well done.
Generally, friends, all you need to know is that this is 4 years since World War I. And obviously, there's a lot of ramifications from World War I that you don't need to know going into this. But generally speaking, shit's bad in Germany. And most of the European countries have had a fucking time of it. The war, of course, was bad enough, but the aftermath was also pretty devastating. We've had revolutions and monarchies have fallen. Germany had King Wilhelm and he fucked it up. He lost. Not only did he lose World War I, but he left the country in debt because he had borrowed everything that he used to lose the war, fucking guy. And now these sad sacks that are in charge of the German Republic now have signed, arguably, one of the worst deals ever. It's the Treaty of Versailles, and it breaks pieces of Germany off, and it created new countries out of old German territory, and it really was a finger shaking from the rest of the world, and you can't have a military anymore, and it's just a mess. So on this evening in 1923 in Munich, they're having a big old party in the beer hall. And please, Michael, would you tell us who is there and what happens next?
Absolutely. The people that are there are first the three most powerful people in Bavaria. So Bavaria, for those of you that don't know, is a state in Germany. Think, imagine New York or California. Bavaria's capital is Munich. And the three most powerful men in Bavaria, in this state, are giving a speech at this beer hall all on the same night. The first guy is the state commissioner. You can think of him as the governor of the state. The second guy is the head of the state police. So straightforward. And the third guy is the head of the state military. So like head of the National Guard, if you will, of that state. These were the three men that owned all of the power. And Hitler, a young Adolf Hitler at the time, had just taken over this fledgling Nazi party, which didn't do all that much. But Hitler, who was already very extreme, dealing with, just like every German at the time, the horrible condition, as you laid out, post-war, the largest inflation event in modern history.
Yuck. And you talk about how they're like wheelbarrowing billions of marks to get food.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I mean, just to put this in perspective, in 1922, a loaf of bread cost 160 marks. In 1923, at the time this story starts, that same loaf of bread cost not 160 marks, but 200 billion marks for a loaf of bread, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean,
so you're emptying your savings, you're mortgaging your house, and you're still fucking hungry.
yeah, and you had just gotten out of the worst war in your country's history, and everyone's blaming you for it, and you don't have an economy, and it's just no military. It's just a terrible situation, and now you're in a crisis. And just before this hyperinflation, or just before this meeting took place, this speech, this state commissioner this governor had just declared a state of emergency. So he has martial law. He's got dictatorial powers. Hitler has this idea that he is basing off of the recent coup that had just taken place in Italy a year before. Benito Mussolini had just marched on Rome with the black shirts and declared himself the leader of Rome, of Italy, and it was sort of blessed by the king, and all that stuff happened.
And Hitler's like, his hard-on for Mussolini is also a fascinating through line through this story. There is a dialogue that you include, because Hitler, and this is another thing that I found so fascinating, is because, as you pointed out, radio is new, but we also have so many recordings that even if you're not listening to the dialogue, the historical record, it reads like a script. It reads like a transcript. And we can read the ums and the ows and the really, I really, really mean it, sir, kind of stuff. And it's humorous to hear Hitler be like, oh, and also tell Mussolini I love his hat. And thanks again. And did I mention how grateful I was and how handsome he is and how much I really, couldn't you also tell him? And you're just like, pump the brakes,
really?
Adolf.
Yeah, it's funny. It sounds like you're exaggerating when you say that, but you're not. I'm not. Yeah. So he hears about this coup, and he wants to do the same thing in Germany. And the Nazi party at the time is nothing close to what it will become. They barely have any representation in the actual government. They have like 2 or 3 seats. Imagine like having like 1 seat in Congress of a political party. Like they're not even the Green Party or like something like that, right? They're just they're nothing. And his plan is, look, we're not really going to get where we want to get to the old-fashioned way. Let's make this happen. Things, extreme times, extreme measures. I have this force of people that I have been employing to intimidate my rivals in the streets of Munich. And we'll talk more about this, the SA, which is like this private army. So I have like a physical arm of my political party. Why don't I just go to this beer hall where these 3 most powerful men are all going to be at the same time, hold them hostage, surround the building with my troops and guns, and then convince them to join a revolt against the national government, march on Berlin, and take over Germany. That's the plan. Yeah.
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
That's it, guys. He's got 2,000 dudes.
Yep.
Which is a lot.
A lot.
And Ernst Röhm is like, yeah, we all have the same shirt on, so they'll know we're together. It's kind of like when I send my kid to camp, right? So they can't mistake us, and we're so scary, and they know how scary we are and how much we like to punch nerds.
Yep.
And they surround this place, and the moment you lay it out, I mean, you guys, there's like diegetic sound and all this like crazy cool stuff. You have to get this book. Hitler fucking jumps on a table and fires a gun into the fucking air.
Yeah. He walks into this crowded bar. It was one of the largest bars in Munich. He jumps onto a table and shoots a gun up into the ceiling, gets everyone's attention immediately, including the 3 men on stage who are giving this speech. And
hard to ignore.
Hard to ignore, gets the attention, and then walks these 3 men, basically says, hey, we have the place surrounded. Everyone is going to not leave. If you don't listen, we're going to have a machine gun set up and we'll shoot anyone that tries to leave. And then he waltzes these three men off the stage into a private room and starts to tell him what his plan is and asks them to join him. And it doesn't work. He starts to explain to them why they need to do this, why they need to join him, why Berlin is a sinful Babel and they have to take it down. And they're like, who the fuck is this guy? And they just say nothing. And he starts to panic, and he does this thing which is kind of crazy, and it exhibits some of his behavior as you go on. But not only does he, take his gun and point it at the man and threatens them, then he takes out the gun and points it at his own head and says, listen, I have 4 shots in this gun, 3 for all of you and 1 for myself. And if this doesn't succeed, I'm going to be a dead man by tomorrow. That doesn't work either. So then
they're like, okay, you first, I guess.
Yeah, cool. I guess we'll find out.
Right.
There's this weird twist that happens in the middle of this scene at the bar, which is this rock star general from the Great War walks in to the bar at the exact moment when Hitler's plan is about to fall apart.
Yes.
So General Ludendorff, and if anyone's seen Wonder Woman, that General Ludendorff, the bad guy from that movie, right? So the same
that guy.
Fuck that guy. Same guy. So he was like the second in command of,
but so loved.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's favorite guy in that room.
100%. Yeah. He was a rock star, and he was exactly the right kind of guy you'd want on your side if you were trying to do like some type of military coup or some kind of takeover. So Ludendorff walks in. He was coaxed into walking into the bar by the Nazis who went over to his house and was like, hey, there's a coup. It's already happening. You've been selected as the leader. And he's like, what? And Ludendorff was already kind of an extreme guy in his retirement anyway. And he was like, all right, look, if there's a coup, like I'm in. Like this is like Germany should be strong. Like I'm down to make it stronger. He gets to this bar and he realizes that basically none of what was promised to him has been done. But he's there. So he's like, look, I'm here. Best chance we might get. So let's just go for it.
Yeah. It takes like 8 minutes to put this suit on.
Exactly. Yeah, right. It's got all the medals on it. And so he basically talks the 3 leaders, the state leaders, into joining this and is like, look, let's do it. Let's go for it. And
this guy has his mustache is weird, but he's got some good ideas.
Kind of looks like Charlie Chaplin, but like, let's make it happen. And so they go for it. They organize a march on the Capitol building. Sound familiar? And they basically get to this standoff at the Capitol building where a wall of state police and their rifles pointed at this marching column faces off with this group of domestic terrorists, and they start shooting at each other, and this standoff ends in a huge firefight. Where Hitler is there, he's in the firefight, then gets pulled down because they were sort of linked arms with each other, and then he gets pulled down. I think he dislocates his shoulder, but everyone around him is getting shot, and he runs. He flees.
Fucking runs.
He runs. He gets thrown into a car and flees the scene. He's later arrested. He is tried, and that trial is broadcast and published in newspapers all over Germany.
He gets so many people know his name.
He goes to jail. He writes a book, and he gets released in 9 months.
Yeah, and it's crazy. He's sentenced to 5 years, but he only serves 9 months, just enough time for him to sort of spew the content that would become Mein Kampf. He didn't technically write it, for whatever that's worth. I mean, people were jotting down his lunacy and eventually bound it up for him, which was nice. But what's crazy then, right, is again, if this is an told story for you, if this is new for you, it feels easy, as I suspect it was for people at the time, to go, that was fucking nuts. Good thing he's obviously never going to go anywhere, right? And what's nuts is, yes, he is found guilty and imprisoned for treason, and the Nazi Party itself is banned in Germany in, was it 1927 or 1928?
1923.
1920. It's banned as early as 1923.
Yep.
And so it's illegal. This party is illegal. He's in jail. He's a convict. And within 10 years from the story that Michael just told us, Adolf Hitler is elected Chancellor of Germany.
Yep.
It's fucking crazy. And that story too, the sort of German on German, and later we find Nazi on Nazi, like the power within Germany for the players in this terrible drama to rise to the position of power that they have is itself such a drama. And I'm wondering if you can tell us briefly about three main characters that they will already know that sort of bubble up during this particular part. We have Hermann Göring, who eventually is the head of the Gestapo, and he is at that beer hall putsch. Ernst Röhm, who is the head of the SA, he was also at that beer hall putsch. And Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, who kind of falls in love with Hitler in the wake
Totally.
of the putsch. Can you sort of tell me a little bit more about these guys and the part that they're playing as the Nazi Party rises?
Absolutely. So Hermann Göring was a fighter pilot in the Great War. He was very successful. He also married very rich and
Smart.
very smart. And he did something that the kind of connections that he had was into the military elite. So because he was this, early ace in the German Air Force in the World War I, and he married rich, he was able to rub elbows with some pretty high-ranking generals, and that was seen as a really interesting, valuable asset to Hitler in the early days. He, and we'll talk about this later, was super into drugs.
Yes. And also my favorite in your book, by the way, you find a new adjective to describe him as fat and it's so funny because the book is not humorous. Like you are not poking fun of the war. You are very funny, but like this book is very serious. But you do allow for a little like the rotund Hermann Göring, the elaborate frame of Hermann Göring.
I think I say his obese silhouette.
And I got to like chapter 5, and I remember one of the notes I wrote down was like, Michael throwing shade on this fatso. Wow. Like we are body shaming. I think the only even in 2024 we can body shame Nazis. It's great.
Yeah, they deserve whatever they get, so that's okay. Yeah. He was a corpulent man, to add a new one.
Nice.
Yeah, and like super gaudy, like whatever. Later on, he very much succumbs to his fame and fortune. But he was an operator. He was like, think of him as like the COO, the chief operating officer of the Nazi Party, and very much a doer, and a minion of Hitler. So that's Göring.
Yeah, and such an interesting frame too, next to Joseph Goebbels, little skinny, dorky, very like, what is it?
Abbott and Costello.
Who's the Abbott and Costello, of course.
Yeah, very. Yeah, they're like the number 10 standing next to each other. They're Goebbels.
Together they're a perfect 10.
Joseph Goebbels was sort of a latecomer in the context of this story. So he wasn't even at the beer hall putsch, but he started to get interested in the Nazi Party after Hitler's release and their second rise. He was a journalist, and a writer, and he had aspirations to be a playwright. When film became a thing, to be a filmmaker. But he ultimately became the minister of propaganda. And propaganda is like a word that has a very specific connotation right now, fairly. But think of like the word used at the time was much closer to something like communications or marketing or branding.
Totally.
Yeah, it was like, it's like weird to have, it's like, imagine having like Secretary of Defense, like Secretary of Propaganda, like, they had that at the time, but they would be considered like, the press secretary or the communications director, right? So they were responsible, he would later become responsible for culture and art and government propaganda later in his career. But early on, he was just an admirer of Hitler.
Fanboy.
Huge fanboy. And Hitler himself, in his rise in the Nazi Party, before all of this happened, he rose up through the ranks as the head of the propaganda group within the party. So he had an eye for it, and he identified talent within Joseph Goebbels, and that became his sort of calling, and he became extremely sort of successful at that. So that's Goebbels.
And then we've got Ernst Röhm, head of that SA, right?
Yes. Ernst Röhm is probably one of the least out of those three known to the modern person, because he didn't make it to the war, and we'll maybe talk about that. But Ernst Röhm
He's also the closest personally, right, to Adolf?
Yes, he was literally...
Adolf 80?
Yeah, Adi. Yeah, he was literally Hitler's best friend. He knew Hitler the longest. He also fought in the war. He was a captain. He was shot in the face and had this big scar across his face. Yeah, huge.
Very scary dude.
Very scary dude. And he led the SA, and the SA was a precursor to the SS, or the Gestapo, or the secret police and investigations unit. The SA was much less sophisticated. The SA was basically a private army that this political party had, that they would use to break up demonstrations of their rivals. If a communist was giving a speech in a town hall, the SA would march in and break it up and fight people in the street, and they would just brawl. And there was this huge street war going on between the Nazis and the communists, which was the second largest party at the time. And that's another sort of area of interest. But Ernst Röhm his job was to basically orchestrate this chaos in the streets and point it in the direction of Hitler's enemies. Scary dude. The bulldog, the attack dog of the party. And, the SA was these weren't like political activists shoving each other around in the street. Like, these were, I think, up to 2 million men were in the SA. They were mostly veterans from the Great War. So they all had military and combat experience. And they were out of jobs, out of work, out of money. And this was an opportunity they promised them, and really just taking advantage of these veterans on their hardships, and just promising them the ability to fight for Germany again, because the military was not allowed anymore.
Right. And they're also, for those of you who maybe have listened to a few of the recent HILF episodes, if you recall, in 1928, Josephine Baker goes to Berlin to perform, and she had been there in 1926 and had a blast. And when she goes in 1928, her shows are shut down, and it is scary, man. And it is exactly Ernst Röhm's brown shirts, these SA fucks, who are sort of unofficial, because the Nazis technically don't have the power. So, at risk of bludgeoning us with the present, it would be if the Proud Boys were, much bigger, much more organized, and just were showing up as they have occasionally at, drag library readings and shit. This isn't, you don't say that the Republican Party sent the Proud Boys to this. It's just sort of an understanding. We share the same hatred and we flex on your behalf and with, to an extent, your protection.
Yeah. And then imagine if it was actually like physically orchestrated by the party, and it was, as you said, much bigger, much more, even more violent than the Proud Boys
and
are
bragged about it. Look what we did.
Yeah, they would get drunk in the street and fight, and not just like punch, but like shoot and explode, and these were like. This was, and it became a real problem in Germany later on. But that's Ernst Röhm, and that's like the thing he was wielding as a power source.
Yeah, amazing. Oh my God, Michael. Okay, so we have, as we stand, you and I, we've give or take, we've come up to about 1930-ish, and we know some of the main characters we're going to be dealing with in a minute. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some sort of hot, nasty Nazi on Nazi violence that ultimately elevates the real fucks that we know we're gonna roll with in the years to come. We'll be right back.
This podcast is part of the Deluxe Edition Network. To find other great shows on the network, head over to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. That's deluxeeditionnetwork.com.
It is not a good day in Icewind Dale. Auril, the Frost Maiden, a god, the divine embodiment of winter's fury, has withdrawn to this cold corner of the world, plunging it into endless night.
Can you repeat this harbinger of winter's name again one more time?
Auril.
Auril.
This is I Seduce the Dragon.
Gentry, I'm so sorry. I'm about to fight some kids.
God damn it.
It's a new D&D podcast. Your hands are tied behind your back. Okay, what's that face?
Am I into it?
Jesus Christ.
And a hell of a good time. You suddenly see the outline of a giant dwarf shape.
Ooh, he big.
Oh, he's so big.
Wow, he's so big.
I've never seen someone take up 4 squares on Roll20.
Look for I Seduce the Dragon
I kick him real hard.
wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, before we crawl back up the annals with Michael, a moment for my favorite buffs in history, my patrons. Oh, now HILF is a one-woman operation, all right? From research to editing. Yes, I do find and insert all those fun audio transitions. And my patrons are a critical shot in the arm. Not only do they help me afford the books and the tech and the subscriptions necessary to get my legs around this stuff, but, I feel the love. And if you want to goose my heart a little, but a financial thing isn't in the cards for you, you could court me the old-fashioned way. Share an episode, rate and review, and of course, head over to Instagram and...
Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow. Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow. Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow.
I've poured myself a Maker's Mark. I've moved on from the kombucha because shit's heating up.
Yeah, it is, and I'm here with beer because it's a warm day here, and I'm trying to relax with a crisp brew.
Keep it cool, man. And you, listeners, we are coming back to this story, this just incredible, heart-wrenching story. I'd like you to rejoin us in 1934. We come into the story, Hitler has now become chancellor, and he is not quite the absolute top fucking dog yet. Like, he's inching closer, but he does have a lot of power. And the Ernst Röhm and the SA have become even more dangerous and scary and sophisticated. But now something new is also happening within Germany, which is they've actually scared the too many Germans. And the president is feeling pressure to tell Hitler, who is chancellor, slightly under him, hey, get these brown shirts are a problem. They're very scary. And Ernst Röhm, Adolf Hitler's very best buddy, is at the head of this SA, and they're getting stronger. So bring us, Michael, if you would, to 1934. And because of all this pressure, Adolf has asked Ernst Röhm and the head of the SA to take off their uniforms for a nice extended weekend and to just go enjoy a hotel, right?
The Hanselbauer Hotel. It is the epicenter of what became known as the Night of Long Knives, the event that was the consolidation of power that Hitler created. He made, as you said, the German military, the German president, and the president of the German Republic is kind of, think of them as like the King of England right now, where they're the head of state, but they don't really run the country. The chancellor is like the prime minister. They run the country. So Hitler's the chancellor, and the president is this guy named Hindenburg, another super popular general from the Great War. And
yes, the guy that the blimp... If you're thinking Hindenburg, yeah, that guy. They named the blimp after him because he was such a big deal.
Super popular, yeah. He was the commander in chief of the armed forces in World War I. So the guy, and he was the president now, and he was very old. He was at the very end of his life, but he understood that this was getting out of hand. The violence taking place in the streets, the communist street wars against the Nazis, people like average citizens were getting hurt and dying and getting killed in collateral damage. And so in no uncertain terms, the president told Hitler, you need to deal with this SA and Ernst Röhm, or you're out. I'm going to declare martial law. I will revoke your powers as chancellor, and you will be gone.
You'll be gone. And remember that Hitler is a squib. He is so nervous all the time, and he has clawed and fought and manipulated and done pretty much everything he can just to get to this precarious spot. And one of the only kind of people in the room that has a newspaper big enough to hit this dog has just held it over his head, right?
100%. Yeah. And there's all this talk from the SA that's happening right now around this concept of a second revolution. And a second revolution basically comes from the French Revolution. After the French Revolution, where there was this desperate need for a national military because all of the military in France was like super rich officers. The SA was saying, we're going to have a second revolution. We're going to do like what the French did. We're going to have a Republican army that's going to be the SA, and we're going to absorb the military and take over. And of course, the generals were like, yeah, no, we're good with that.
We already did that. Kind of.
Right.
I mean, like the monarchy is gone. Like we're still figuring this out.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And they're, like absolutely not. So Hitler makes a deal. So he gets this ultimatum from the president, and he makes a deal with the generals, and he says, look, I'll take care of the SA. You will not be threatened by them anymore, and neither will the rest of Germany. If I do this, I want your support after the president dies for me to absorb the presidential power. And if you back me, I will eliminate this problem for you.
And he kind of knows. We don't even, and by the way, this isn't like, wink, wink, will assassinate the president. This president he's so fucking old that everybody kind of knows that this is a waiting game, right? Yeah. And so Hitler is literally just like, when the inevitable happens, you don't hold new elections, we don't get a new president, I'm the guy. That's generally the deal, am I right?
100%, that is the deal. And he makes the deal. And this is, by the way, like both of them want this because at the time, Hitler being more in charge is good for the military because he promises all of this thing about rebuilding the military, rearming, doing all this stuff. So it means advancing careers. It means a larger, more powerful military. It means they are more powerful in their minds, they believe. And they also think that us backing you is going to indebt you to us. So we'll have some power over you as well. That's what they think.
Yeah, this is our way to check Hitler because he'll owe us.
Exactly.
He'll be so grateful. Yeah.
That's right. So he tells Ernst Röhm, Hitler tells Ernst Röhm in the essay to, hey, take a month off.
Everybody's so
violence.
mad at you guys.
You
Go
gotta
get some
chill.
pretzels.
Get some pretzels and some wurst and take a month off. Don't wear your uniforms. Don't march. You're not allowed. I say so.
Oh, and by the way, if you want to do gay stuff, which you probably will because you're all going to be in that big hotel, because this was also part of the weird rumorings that were like part of this, like, watch out for the SA, was this like, I would say it was a rumor that there were a bunch of gays in the SA, which is why I call it the don't SA gay rule, whatever. But like,
Oh man, wow,
I know.
that's great.
Thank you. I'm really proud of myself for that
Well
one
done.
too. But this had not endeared them certainly to the powers that be or the German public. And so that there's a bunch of gay guys in the SA was a part of it. So for Hitler to say, hey, why don't you guys all go together to one hotel and just lay low for a while was kind of an, I don't know, that struck me as sort of the first clue that maybe this was a fucking setup. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a setup for sure. And you're absolutely right in that these stuffy old generals were very not cool with how well known it was. And it's not like they kept it a secret either, that there were, I mean, if you think about German metropolitan culture at the time in the interwar period, there was just a much more sort of vibrant culture of sex and drugs and performance and theater and art,
Gender
and
bending.
gender bending. Like, I mean, you know, we'll talk more about that, but like there's all of that. So he tells him to go to this hotel in this resort town in the Alps, just outside of Munich. And there he would initiate an event that would consolidate his power. And what happened was a column of cars with Hitler in there drove into this resort town. They stopped in front of the Hanselbauer Hotel, where all of the leadership of the SA were sound asleep inside. This is just at dawn. And Hitler gets out of the car, and out of the rest of the cars step out not SA members, but these new black-coated SS officers that were managed by a separate person who were known to be a little more lethal, a little more cunning, a little more loyal.
A little less gay.
A little less gay than the SA. And these men got out of the cars, walked up the steps of the hotel. And this hotel was built where all of the entrances to the hotel rooms were from the outside. And you had these long balcony porches that wrapped around the entire hotel, and there were multiple floors. So imagine these black-coated men, Gestapo, SS men, marching up the steps, running up the steps, stopping outside of each hotel room door, waiting for the signal from Hitler. Hitler gives the signal, And all at once, they kick in the doors. They find all of these SA officers who are still waking up, sound asleep, just getting woken out of their beds, yanked out of their hotel rooms, dragged out into the streets. Some of them were, as you've said, with other men, found with other men. Those men were given special attention by the troopers, dragged out of their hotel rooms, brought into the parking lot, and shot in the head.
Fuck. Oh, and these naked, half asleep guys, they are screaming. And these are tough ass dudes, right? I mean, these are the dudes that have been doing this. These are the dudes that do the dragging, getting their ass dragged, and they are begging for their lives. I can't imagine they don't know some of these SS dudes, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And Hitler is personally there. And this is a part that just kills me. He walks into the room where Ernst Röhm is and closes the door behind him. And we do not know what took place inside that room. But what we do know, and you said some of this in part one, that Ernst Röhm was his best friend, the only one who called him by his first name. God bless it to be a fly on the wall in that room, right? But when Hitler leaves that room, Ernst Röhm is alive, and he is not dragged down the street and executed like the other SA guards. He is arrested and put in prison. And can you tell us, Michael, what happens to Ernst Röhm after he goes to jail?
Ernst Röhm is given the honor of a very special kind of conclusion to his life. He's held in a cell. By the way, it's the same prison that both he and Hitler sat in after the beer hall putsch.
Oh my God.
Years before.
Jesus.
Ernst Röhm is sitting in the cell by himself. The officers walk into his cell and hand him a pistol with a single bullet and walk out. And they consider this an act of mercy.
You're welcome.
Here you go. And the officers leave the cell and they wait. And they wait for a gunshot. And they're expecting him to shoot himself. And they wait for about 10 minutes and nothing happens.
Nothing happens.
Nothing happens. They go back into the cell, and what they see is Ernst Röhm has stood up from his chair. He has taken off his shirt, puffed out his chest.
His chest is all out. Oh my God.
And looked right into the eyes of the officers and says, "If I am to be killed, let Adolf do it himself."
Oh my God. And I'm in the coffee shop. I can't stand it. He what? Let Adolf do it himself. And then what happens?
He tries to say one more thing. The officers shush him. Then they shoot him.
They shoot him. Adolf, you coward. You know, and this is another thing. Like, I know, the Titanic sinks. And like I said, I know this stuff. But I didn't know any of this shit. And I'm thinking, Jesus, fuck. Does Adolf come in here and shoot his friend? No, because even though that'd be shitty, it would also be something like responsibility. It'd be something like courage. It would be something like living up, he doesn't.
Yeah, it's very much a precursor to the kind of behavior you will see much later into the war as the Holocaust comes to life, and how squeamish and uncomfortable and afraid Hitler is with the realities of what he is ordering. And this is just the beginning of that. Hitler was would have been, goes without saying, obviously, the worst, like one of the worst human beings that have ever lived. Also would have just been a weird guy to anyone who would have met him at the time, even before he came to power. He was a hypochondriac. He was anxious. He had a ton of war PTSD. He was in a poison gas attack that almost killed him. He was, of course, deeply racist and anti-Semitic, but he also needed the support of all sorts of outcasts and extremists in whatever form they were in until he didn't need them anymore. And you definitely see that shift happen as those people become a threat to his power, which is the only thing that mattered to him, so that he could achieve his insane goals later in his life.
Yeah, and the insanity of Hitler is actually something I would like to go to next, because for a lot of us who have consumed this World War II history, you've seen Hitler in his speeches and he's ranting and he's spitting and he's pounding, but it can, very easily be construed as just charisma. And then you sort of see the result, the power he appears to have wielded simply by how much moved around him. And I think that one can think to themselves, boy, what a powerful guy. What a guy who he must have walked into the room and people were like, whoa, Hitler was here. And they called him the Fuhrer and the hands. He must have been such a powerful guy. And I have repeatedly been stymied and on my heels with just what a fucking weirdo he was, and how everyone who hung out with him was like, what a squibby little weirdo. But your book has some particularly colorful, detailed, historically documented moments of Hitler's particular looniness. And I would love to talk about one in particular. Can you tell me what earned Hitler the nickname the Carpet Muncher?
Absolutely. The Teppichfresser, which is, I think, the German word for it. This actually happened while negotiations with Great Britain were happening. Hitler wanted to occupy and absorb Czechoslovakia into the Third Reich, which was beginning to grow. He actually wanted a little war with them. He wanted an opportunity to showcase the military strength of Germany post-war that was actually coming back to life. And so in order to prevent this, Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of the UK, went to try to, as you said, talk some sense and ultimately prevent a war, because the prospect of this blowing up into another European inferno that people were only just 15 years or so separated from. He goes to Hitler's house in the mountains and tries to ask him point blank, like, what do you want? Why don't we just cut down to the chase here and tell me what you want and what you're going to get out of this. And I'll do my best to get it for you to avoid a war, because that's not going to happen. We have the largest navy on earth. We could choke you out entirely by ourselves if we wanted to. So that's not going to happen. You don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. Let's figure this out. In a very British diplomatic way.
Over tea.
A little bit, yes. And it was actually the first time that Chamberlain had ever flown in an airplane before, because it was like he had to be there like that night to have. I mean, this was we were days away from when a supposed invasion was going to happen of Czechoslovakia. So he gets to Hitler, he negotiates, has this conversation with him, basically determines, okay, Hitler, you want this Sudetenland, which is basically a region of Czechoslovakia that's right on the border of Germany, where all of the defenses of Czechoslovakia are, the military manufacturing facilities, the oil and electrical sort of infrastructure. It would basically disarm Czechoslovakia and make the rest of the country super easy to invade if he ever wanted to. But that was the ask. And the excuse that Hitler used was, they're all Germans who live in the Sudetenland. They all speak German. They were part of Germany before World War I. I mean, it's kind of the same argument that you hear from folks like Vladimir Putin, who say, oh, the Ukrainians, they're Russians, right? And to Hitler, the whole experiment of Czechoslovakia was an abomination.
So diverse.
It was too diverse. It was the exact opposite of this like ethno-state state that Hitler was envisioning. And so, he tells Chamberlain, this is what I want. And if you let me do that, no war. I'll be fine with that. So Chamberlain's like, all right, we'll see what I can do. I'll talk to the allies of Czechoslovakia, like France, like they're actually allies with Czechoslovakia. I'm not, but I'll have to convince them. I'll have to convince my cabinet. I'll have to convince the Czechs.
Also, I don't really have to convince the Czechs because with UK, they're so infantizing of this country. Like they sort of reinforce Hitler's point of view by simply not letting them have any say or any independence in the decision of this, at all. I mean, the Czechs are like, we'd really rather not. I mean, they could not be more clear about how they feel about the Nazis. And the UK just keeps tapping on their head, like, trust us, we have your best interest at heart,
That is exactly how this situation unfolds, negotiating without Czechoslovakia in the room. But Chamberlain leaves and he tries to figure this out, and long story short, Hitler starts playing more hardball. Chamberlain comes back and is like, all right, I got it. Everything you want. You're going to absorb this region of Czechoslovakia. It's going to work. And then Hitler's like, not good enough anymore. I actually want a military occupation. I want to show that my military works and it kicks ass, and deals off like new terms. Then Chamberlain gets pissed. He's like, you know what? We're done. I'm going to leave. He leaves.
He's like, they booed me.
Yeah.
Chamberlain's like, everyone's so mad at me, and they've been telling me not to talk to you because you're crazy, and I bent over backwards, and now you're saying he walked in to talk to Hitler like, buddy, are you gonna love what I brought for you today? And Hitler's like, nah, changed my mind.
It was a total rug pulling out from under Chamberlain. He got totally schooled. He had risked his political career on this deal, and Hitler said, "Don't care. I don't really care about your domestic political problems, man. Like I'm here to fight, and institute my crazy worldview on the earth. So figure it out. I don't know." And that was a bluff. What Hitler did, that hardball that he played, he had no backup plan if Chamberlain said, all right, war's on, dude, here we go. Because a war between Germany and Czechoslovakia, even a one-on-one contained war, at best, would have been a brutal, bloody conflict that probably would have still meant the end of Nazi Germany. It would not have been a war that would have been clean or fast. And then if the allies of Czechoslovakia, like France, who was, by the way, right behind Germany, facing in the other direction in attacking Czechoslovakia, could have invaded at any time with 1.5 million men erupting over the Maginot Line, invading Germany, this would have been the end of Nazi Germany, would not have been a war that Hitler could win. So in this period of time where Hitler has just bluffed to the most powerful navy on earth, saying, I'm going to do what I want, deal with it, he freaks out. He loses all semblance of composure in meetings that he has with his own people in the days that take place after that meeting with Chamberlain. And in some of those cases, eyewitnesses who are in the meetings with Hitler say that on some occasions, Hitler would get out of his chair, collapse on the ground, and start flailing his body like he was having a seizure, facing down. Then he would take the corner of an area rug that was under the table and start chewing on it. Yeah, and that's the name that he was given. Like low-level Nazis would start calling him Teppichfresser because this was the carpet muncher guy that we follow. So yeah, he was. This might sound crazy to you, Don, but Hitler, a little wacky guy. Yeah, what? I know. It's yep.
I'm shocked. This does kind of lead us into the next thing I want to talk about, which is the drugs, man. Can you tell us a little bit more about that.
Oh, Don, I mean, drugs in the Third Reich is, we could have a whole conversation just about that because of, I mean, let's start with much of what we know about the Blitzkrieg was just crystal meth. I mean, how do you have a soldier or a tank operator drive for 7 straight days without sleep? Or an infantryman feel invincible? Or a fighter pilot shoot straight? Or keeping morale up in campaign after campaign? It was Pervitin, which was a drug manufactured by a German pharmaceutical company giant. Pervitin was basically meth.
Fuck.
Pervitin was in the rations of every German soldier. It was a requirement to take it every day. It was not something that people just did. Sure, they also did it casually. This, by the way, in some weird ways, was also replicated on the Allied side. Sure. There were some amphetamines that were prescribed to American soldiers in World War II as well, but not nearly to the extent that they were in the German military. So everyone was, and this went even before the rise of the Nazi Party, there was this culture in interwar Germany of fun, drugs, parties, cabarets. Drugs was a very big part of cosmopolitan culture in German cities at the time. And this didn't change when the Nazis came into power. Even though the Nazi government had a very official stance of keep it clean, no more drugs, this is not allowed anymore. It was part of this sinful Babel Berlin that all these drugs were being taken. But it really just moved into private. And so soldiers, as we said, were given meth to fuel their energy, morale, make them shoot straighter and run faster and feel invincible. The Nazi leadership, as you pointed out, were on all sorts of drugs. Hermann Göring, who we talked about earlier, Mr. Corpulent, had he probably had the biggest reputation for drug use. His flavor was heroin, and more and more as the war went on, later on, he became just more and more just stoned all the time. Hitler was no different. Although the approach that he took was less recreational and more prescribed. Hitler had a personal doctor. His name was Theodor Morell. He was a quack, but Hitler loved him. Hitler's mother died of cancer at a young age, and he was terrified of getting sick and things like cancer and just something leading to something bad. So someone like Morell, whose specialty was injection medications, started to prescribe Hitler something like 20 plus injections per day. Yeah, not a little bit. Of course, Pervitin, the methamphetamine, was a huge component of the drug regimen, but also like poisons like strychnine, nightshade. He would take cocaine through eye drops, which was like a thing.
That's interesting, man.
Yeah. And then
it reminds me of
like,
Michael Jackson's doctor. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where
Elvis's
it was like,
doctor,
we love this.
Michael Jackson's doctor. Yeah.
We need that the consumer of the drugs isn't comfortable with the idea that they're capital D drugs, and is much more comfortable with the idea that this is medicine and it's coming from a doctor.
Like Hitler was like, you got to see this doctor, like to all of his
I feel fucking great. I think I can take over the world.
He was already an extremely emotional and performative person in his behavior when talking to people. He always had one-sided arguments with whoever he was across the table from, and just add things like meth and cocaine and all of the drugs that he was taking on a daily basis that only increased as the war went on and as news got worse. So obviously we know how Hitler ended up killing himself later as the war ended, but it would shock me if he were to live much longer after, given just how much drugs he was on. Yeah. He would have overdosed. He probably did in a lot of cases, and it was just sort of kept under wraps.
God damn. I mean, do you see what I mean, guys? And again, when you're thinking about this through the scope that your book continually puts on events, which is sort of a what if, just to think if any of these overdoses had taken, if anyone who had witnessed him in this moment of weakness had either taken advantage of that moment of weakness or simply seen it as actual weakness, where might the course of history have gone? I wonder if before we leave, if you can tell us, given the research that you've done and given how much time you've spent looking at these necessary factors to start something as devastating as World War II, what's keeping you up at night these days, Michael?
Yeah, that's really the whole question, I think, of the story, and a big reason to why I wrote the book and why I think it's important today. I haven't shared this publicly, but this was a story that I wrote with a family member in mind, in particular my father, who was very much and I think everyone knows this person in their lives, who is not a bad person, but is a person that, because things do not affect him directly, they see the bad that happens in the world as happening somewhere else, not worth the action that you might need to take in order to challenge those bad things. They are counting on your indifference. They are counting on your dissolution of ideas. They're counting on your cynicism. And there is a lot of bad that happens in the world today. Pandemics, wars, invasions, all sorts of terrible things. And as bad as they are, and as intolerable as these things are, it's important to realize that while they may not have happened in our lifetimes, they have happened many times before. And in some cases, the people that had to deal with those situations were just people. And some of those people didn't just go through those horrible events, but overcame them, pushed back, and were the change in the world that they wanted to see. And they did that because they realized that they had the power to do so. And so when I see things like in 2014, when Vladimir Putin ordered unmarked troopers to occupy Crimea in Ukraine, I immediately draw that to Hitler ordering unmarked troopers to occupy the Gleiwitz Tower on the border of Poland that started World War II as an excuse.
Which is another fucking great story from your book.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I see those parallels. When I see the Uyghur Muslims being corralled into, quote, re-education camps in China, it's hard not to draw parallels to concentration camps. When you see, far left political activists fighting with moderate left politicians because there's a purity test that isn't being met. And in the meantime, you are risking a common enemy from exploiting that division and taking power in itself. It's hard not to think about all of the political parties that couldn't hold it together to stop the Nazi Party from rising, which, by the way, never held a majority in the Reichstag, ever. The closest they ever came was like 35% of the chamber. They never had a majority, but because their opposition couldn't get their shit together, they failed and they didn't see the threat for what it was. So all of that is to say that your cynicism is valid, but it is not an excuse. You have a responsibility to be a check against the worst case scenario. And no amount of cynicism absolves you from that charge.
I'm hot as an oven, Michael. God damn, that's fucking fun. I wish I still smoked cigarettes, man. I'd be all over this. Please tell my folks what, in addition to buying your book, of course, go and buy his book, download his book and listen to it because it's great. What can we do to help you and your book the most right now?
Have a listen. Give it a shot and let me know what you think. You can get the book anywhere you buy audiobooks, Audible, Amazon, Apple Books, wherever. You can go to howtostartawar.com to get updates. You can follow on Instagram at howtostartawarpod. But I think most importantly, you can vote in every election. You can stay engaged. You can follow what's happening. And you can believe in yourself. You can believe that you have the power to make change. And if you don't believe me, then you're gonna listen to the right book.
And then when you listen to it, you send me a message and you go, Dawn, was this the part where you stood up and lost your mind? And I'll be like, yes, because there were so many. Oh, Michael Trapani, thank you so much. And I'm going to be hitting you up again. Will you join us again?
Absolutely. I'd be thrilled. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, thanks again to Michael Trapani. Yeah, I could have talked to him forever, and we didn't even get to tell you about the intrigue that was the Reichstag fire, or what the Nazis meant when they ordered the delivery of canned meat during the Geiwitz incident. Get me to the show notes to find all the ways that you can hear his audiobook, How to Start a War, and then 2 things. 1, tell me what you think because, oh my God. 2, vote in every election, you influential, history-moving agent of power. You vote and high five everyone else who does. As for us, we'll be back in just 2 short weeks with our next new episode. And if you'd like to hear what it is and get access to it a whole day early, well, head over to patreon.com/HILF podcast and give me money. Oh, until we meet again. Our theme song was composed and performed by Kat Perkins. A reminder that you can find my sources, links to the books, documentaries, and articles I reference in the summary of this episode, or by emailing us, hilfpodcast@gmail.com, or messaging us on social media @hilfpodcast. This has been HILF, History I'd Like to Fuck with Dawn Brody. I'm Dawn Brody, reminding you that history is a party, and everybody's coming.